Again, thanks to all of you. These are programs that the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center hosts in coordination with the Big Bend Coalition Against Human Trafficking, or BBCAT. BBCAT is our local anti-trafficking organizing coalition. We meet quarterly. We're meeting next in May 4, at the Sheriff's Association for all of you who are in our area of the Big Bend of Florida. We're always looking for new members, and they're wonderful meetings for networking, for seeing each other, and for also just learning more, because we have great speakers. Kelly Doherty is our contact on getting more information there. And of course, I'll be putting my information in the chats as well, and we'll be able to help you connect up with us if you're interested. I should say too, we have two committees. We have a committee that works on survivor support, and we also have a law enforcement committee. So we have individuals, and then we also all connect. All right, next slide, please. And as I mentioned, I'm with the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. STAC is a nonprofit here locally. We support and assist all survivors of trafficking, labor or sex trafficking and sex trafficking, males, females, children, adults, undocumented, documented. We do regardless of faith affiliation or orientation, sexual orientation. So we are here on this issue of human trafficking for everyone. We do individual case management. I meant to change that to care management, but we do that again to provide direct assistance very closely in collaboration with our partner, the International Rescue Committee here locally, to, again, all survivors. We do this, of course, like all of you who are doing this work know, the only way we can do it is in partnership. And so we know that it takes that village, and that's how we're able to do our work and really do it as we do things like this program. So we raise the bar in terms of everyone's understanding about particular issues impacting survivors and our communities and our work with on this issue, but we also do it in our area, in rural areas. We do lots of community education and tailor our trainings very often to particular areas. And I'm looking at the chat, my goodness, we're getting people from all over the country and all over the state of Florida. Next slide, please. We've got a lot of free and great information for you. Our website is a very rich place to explore. I really want to encourage you to do that. There's the website, surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. Know that we've got posters, we've got things that are hard copies. Please contact us. And what I'm going to do too is put this in the chat. That's my email. And know that this program and all of our other programs are also on this website. Every time we have a webinar, we record it. So it's these Third Friday programs. It's also lots of other programs. And we do that really for your benefit, so that you can understand more about this issue of human trafficking. Of course, we do our work free of charge. We're constantly, looking for grants and receiving funding and support, and always appreciate any of you supporting us as well. When you get to our website, you'd see how to do that. Next slide, please. One of the most interesting and compelling things that STAC has started to do is our new podcast called Imagine Freedom. This is a 20-30-minute podcast. We will be talking only to survivors of trafficking. And I have to tell you, I love doing this. I've loved coordinating with survivors. The first one was released recently. We're about to drop another one. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts or Google or any of them. You could also go straight to our website. That QR code will let you know how to find out more. And I really encourage you to do that. If there are survivors on with us today and you'd be interested in speaking with me, with STAC on this, again, please be in contact. I'll put my email up, but we'd really love to hear from you. And I want to say too, this is to be talking to survivors about what you think we all should know, what we should be doing. It's not required at all that you talk about the worst things that ever happened to you. Quite to the contrary, you are experts in what happened, and we want to learn more and learn what's true. All right, next slide, please. We also have a training program called stackpro.org. This is geared to our workplaces, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, retail, banking, hospitality, restaurants, offices, office parks. This is to help you understand how trafficking comes to work. It's a free 1-hour program. And recently we have also developed this so we can do customized training to you online and in person if you're in our area. We also just have had this approved for 2 hours of continuing legal education credit from the Florida Bar, as well as approved from the Department of Business and Professional Reg for their mandatory training on this issue. All right, next slide. I am thrilled to be, again, introducing Marina Anderson to you today. Marina is one of the people who we go to a lot from STAC when we need help. And I'll tell you why. For her title, Florida Department of Children and Families Regional Human Trafficking Coordinator for both Northeast and Northwest regions. For those of you outside our area, that's all the way from one end of the state in the Panhandle to the other, from Pensacola to Jacksonville. Marina has been with the department for over 2 decades now, working in many different capacities, from child protective investigator to being a certified trainer in not just human trafficking, but domestic violence and other forms of physical and sexual abuse. She's a very dynamic trainer, as you will soon find out if you haven't heard her before. As I mentioned, Marina works throughout the Panhandle of Florida and provides support to all of us over on this issue in many different capacities. This topic today, and I should tell you too, Marina is part of all of our work across the board and all of our task forces. So Marina, thank you for being there all the time for us, for all of the DCF entities, as well as all the contracted DCF community-based care CBCs organizations. And also, thank you for bringing this topic to our attention, because so often we do see the intersection of these two issues of substance misuse and substance use disorders and trafficking. So Marina, thank you. It's good to see you, and we really look forward to your presentation today.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
As you're doing that, let me remind everybody to please put your comments in the chat. We're going to get to your questions as we can, if they're foundational during Marina's presentation, and she's going to leave time at the end. So you can put your comments in the chat and questions in the Q&A, and I'll get to them as well during her presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great Friday, and we'll have a very relaxing weekend. I know you guys all deserve it. We're going to be talking today about the links between substance abuse and human trafficking. This is something that we are seeing more and more. As Robin said, I've been doing this work for 21 years, and the amount of cases that we are receiving with this link between that substance abuse and human trafficking is increasing all the time. And I think it's important to really understand that dynamic, understand what draws young people, and whether or adults and children, to substances, how it can be recruited into trafficking through substance use, how substance use is often used as a coping mechanism. And we're going to be talking about this a lot today. As some of you guys probably remember, when you were back in school, if they say, if you hear something over and over again, it's probably important. It may be on a test later. Obviously, we're not testing, but it is important. So I may mention that periodically throughout this training, and it's just something I want you to absorb and have that's going to be your takeaway. So understanding during this presentation, you're going to understand that traffickers are master manipulators. And just for the purpose of this training, also just to go over some keywords that may not be familiar to everybody. I was looking in chat, and many of you work in this space, or, whether you're a DCF, child protective investigator, or supervisor, or case management, a GAL or ALL. I see a lot of you guys in those roles, but some people may not actually work in this space or have had additional training. So let's talk about what is a human trafficker. So a lot of times people think, when I say that term, they may not really understand, or they think about the movie Taken, someone being kidnapped or being taken out of their yard or taken out of Target or what have you. Yes, do we investigate those type of cases? Absolutely. It's less than 1% of the cases that we see that has any type of kidnapping element to it. But most likely, most people think of pimps, right? When we don't use pimp in our legal language, we don't use it during our training, and because it's a glorified word, right? So human traffickers are pimps, as layman's terms, to really understand what I'm referring to. A buyer, they can also be referred to as a John, or someone that's buying sex. But it's very important to understand females buy sex as well. Or, it's not just males that buy sex. It's not just males that are traffickers. We have female traffickers, and the same thing with our victims or survivors. They could be male, they could be female, or they may identify in a different way as well. And so really understanding that terminology. Child prostitution was stricken from our legal language as of October 1 of 2016. So there's no such thing as child prostitution in the state of Florida. That we replaced that verbiage with commercial sexual exploitation of a child. So if they're involved in trafficking, that in any way, and we're going to go over that in a little bit, whether there's a third party, such as a trafficker or a pimp, or maybe they don't, maybe they are exchanging sexual acts on their own. It doesn't matter. If they're under the age of 18, they cannot consent. So we're going to talk about why traffickers are master manipulators and how they can target person's vulnerability. Everybody here today has a vulnerability. Your vulnerabilities may look very different than what they did when you were 15 or 16 years old. However, we all still have them. We know that people with substance abuse addictions is one of the highest categories of being recruited into trafficking. We know that the person with addiction may be seeking ways to support their drug habit or actively, and we also know that traffickers are actively seeking out that vulnerability to exploit. So one of the vulnerabilities of someone with a substance addiction is definitely going to be that drug seeking behavior, right? And that can be for multiple reasons. Maybe they're using it for coping mechanisms, for maybe past trauma that they endured. Traffickers are also use substances to coerce. So they're going to use it, and they're going to require them to meet quota to make a certain amount of money. And if they don't make that amount of money, then they're going to withhold substance from them. If they make more money, maybe they would give them more substances as a reward and punishment. They're going to be demands. There's, traffickers, it's very common for them to tell their victims when they can sleep, when they can eat, what they can wear, when they can shower. It's very common to have a lot of rules. And if these rules are broken, some bad things could possibly happen. It could be withholding substances. It could be some form of physical or emotional abuse that goes along with it as well. They use this to keep them in the life. And it's a way to increase that trauma bond to their traffickers, to keep them doing what they want to do over and over and over again. And again, many victims use it as substances. Maybe it's past or present trauma that's going on. Maybe they're having to have these sexual interactions with people that they probably wouldn't normally want to have sex with or sexual actions with. And therefore, they're using the substances just to numb themselves or to cope through the daily trauma that they're enduring. Sometimes traffickers use forced criminality. And what that means is they're not only sex trafficking or possibly labor trafficking their victims, but they're making them sell the drugs, they're making them run the drugs, they might be making them commit burglaries or robberies, and as part of the trafficking occurrence as well. So these are all topics that we're going to be talking about throughout this training. So again, substances is the most influential technique human traffickers are going to use to coerce or manipulate or exploit the victim. Oftentimes, again, it could be, I'm going to hurt you if you don't do what I tell you to do. I'm going to hurt your family or somebody you care about. We've had them say, we'll hurt your family pet if you don't do what I tell you to do. But oftentimes they also will either prey on someone that already has a current substance abuse addiction, or they get them addicted to drugs. And we're going to really be talking a lot about this, about gateways and how kids don't understand that substances and harsh, dangerous substances really could be in anything, right? So we see so many cases that we staff every single day. And I know a lot of you guys that are on here can contest to this, that, you know, the kid may say, well, I smoke marijuana, but after I smoked, I felt different than I've ever felt before. And then you do a drug panel on them and they're testing positive, you know, for heroin and cocaine and other substances that they had no idea was in that marijuana. And that's just one example. It could really honestly be in anything. Drugs are being cut with multiple different things, and they just have absolutely no idea what they're putting in their system. Substance is commonly used to prey on persons with vulnerability, again, recruiting them into labor and sex trafficking. We also have a lot of traffickers that will target areas that have homeless shelters or drug addiction halfway houses for labor trafficking and sex trafficking as well. The traffickers may recruit people, luring them in with drugs and alcohol. So they introduce them to drugs and alcohol. And we're seeing this younger and younger. And that's one reason why I get on this soapbox so much with this topic, is because when I started doing this work a long time ago, 21 years ago, you know, if we had a 12-year-old that tested positive for marijuana, it was a really big deal. You know, we're like, oh my goodness, they're only 12 years old. Now, it's sad to say, but they are only tested positive for marijuana. We're like almost taking, you know, a sigh of relief, because we're staffing cases every single day where these kids are 10, 11, 12 years old, and they are addicted to heroin. They are on Molly. They're on other substances that can be very, very dangerous, and to the point of could cause fatalities. And, you know, we need to do more to understand what the threats are, to talk to our kids about these threats, to really break it down to them how dangerous it is. You know, the days where, you know, people in college would go to these raves or go to clubs and they're, you know, popping ecstasy. And, you know, even back then in the day, I remember when I was in college and ecstasy was really popular back then, and people would use, and maybe they would pass out because they weren't drinking enough water and get dehydrated and heat exhaustion and things like that. But now it is even beyond that, because it's cut with fentanyl or it's cut with other substances that can be extremely fatal. Again, once they have them under their control, they become addicted. The traffickers are just going to use that substance addiction to keep the victims in the trafficking situation. Again, going back to that punishment and reward. So if you meet quota, you'll receive your substances. If you go over quota, maybe you'll get additional substances. If you don't meet quota, then we're going to withhold them. And, you know, once a person has an addiction to a lot of different drugs, it causes severe withdrawal. So when they withhold those drugs, it can become a medical occurrence, right? It can be very dangerous for that person. And again, using it as a coping mechanism is very common as well. So what is human trafficking? It's the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. Under federal and state law, sex trafficking, such as prostitution, pornography, exotic dancing, does not require there to be force, fraud, and coercion if the victim is under 18. So the gist of this definition, if you're under the age of 18, we don't have to prove force, fraud, and coercion. It doesn't matter if they have a third party, a trafficker, gang involvement, you know, the person down the street. It doesn't matter who it is. We don't have to prove that force, fraud, and coercion. That child may even be selling their own images. They may be engaging in sexual transactions for a ride out of town, or for substances, or for food, shelter, clothes. We've staffed 3 cases in the past month on kids that are either engaging in sex trafficking, selling their bodies, or selling sexual acts, or selling sexual content online to pay for their prom dresses. It's prom season. Prom dresses are extremely expensive. Then, of course, all the things that go along with it, hair, makeup, or what have you, getting your nails done, things of that nature. It's very, very expensive. And a lot of people don't have the money to be able to afford it. And the kids know that they can go online and they can make money, which that's a whole nother presentation. So I don't want to get too far off on that, but it happens so often. If your kiddos have TikTok, they have Snapchat, they have social media, they're on gaming systems, they're on Discord, what have you, I can promise you they're probably being solicited. Now, your kids may say, absolutely not, I'm not doing it, or I'm ignoring them and don't answer, but pretty much every kid that is on social media and pretty much every kid that's on chat apps through gaming systems have been solicited. So having those conversations is very important. When we go into the schools and we talk to the kids, when I ask these questions, almost every single hand goes up when I ask them, have they ever been solicited online? Now, again, majority of them say, you know, I just ignored it or what have you, but many don't. Many think, well, you know, I'm not showing my face, so just sending a picture of my private part's gonna be okay. No one will know who I am. But that's not the case, you know, and we've had cases where people would hack into their Snapchat camera rolls and send pictures and send it back to them and say, if you don't send me sexual content, I'll post this image of you. So we see it a lot. So it doesn't matter whether someone is actually making them or whether they are selling their own content. They are not of age, they're not 18, so therefore that is illegal. Now, if it is a person over the age of 18, we do have to prove force, fraud, and coercion. However, it's not that difficult. You know, because again, going back to that substance abuse, if they're saying, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm not going to provide you substances, I'm not going to give you the drugs that you're addicted to, all they can think of is usually that next fix. They're going to do whatever they need to do to be able to get those substances. They could also tell them, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to kill your kids. And even though that person might not be winning Mother or Father of the Year awards, usually they have some form of protective capacities where they do not want their children hurt. So they're going to continue to do whatever they tell them to do. Commercial sex act, any sex act on which any account of value is given to or received by. So that's what changes it into possibly a sexual abuse situation to a commercial sexual exploitation situation. So if there is something in exchange, so it could be a sexual abuse situation. There is, say, the neighbor, for instance, the neighbor is sexually abusing a child and they tell them, if you let me touch you, I'll give you $10. If you let me touch you, I'll take you to get ice cream. If you touch me, I'll take you to the corner store to buy candy. That's an exchangement for that sexual act for something of value. And that changes it from just sexual abuse to commercial sexual exploitation. Labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining a person for labor or services using force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or slavery. So in Florida law, you only have to prove force and fraud. In federal law, you have to prove force, fraud, and coercion, and that's regardless of their age. So that's where it differs between sex trafficking. You do not have to prove force, fraud, and coercion if they're under 18, but with labor trafficking, you need to prove those elements regardless of age. As far as DCF, we investigate all areas of trafficking. So we talked about that third party, that trafficker, that pimp. If it is a third party that's brokering the exchange for the sexual act for a tangible item. Sometimes it could be money, but it doesn't have to be, right? It could be Amazon gift cards. It could be, you know, just gaming codes. It could be for, you know, Bitcoins. We see a lot. So it could be the traffickers could be any age, any gender, and any background. And the same thing with victims and survivors. Any age, any gender, and any background. Gang trafficking. Gang trafficking is definitely on the rise. They know they make just as much money, if absolutely not more money, trafficking a person over and over again, opposed to if they go sell drugs, they have to go find more drugs to sell, and so forth and so on. So they definitely are getting involved in trafficking. Gang sex trafficking cases are hard to work because there's an extra element of violence there, right? Criminality is an everyday occurrence. They're seeing homicides, they're seeing threats being made and followed through on a daily basis. And they're told if they talk, if they roll on their family, because that's the way they look at it, is this is their family unit, then something bad is going to happen to them. And most likely it will. They will put a hit out or what have you. So it's very dangerous for survivors all across the gamut, but especially with gang sex trafficking. Familial, we've seen an increase with familial trafficking because there are opioid issues. We've seen an increase with the parents or caregivers are addicted to substances, and maybe they're trafficking. They're involved in trafficking as well. We've seen where parents and children both are addicted and they're both involved in the trafficking. And we've seen an increase in the sale of child pornography. So some parents are addicted to substances and they may say, well, I'm not going to allow anyone to actually touch my child, but I'll take a picture of that child's genitalia and I'll sell it on the dark web, and I'll be able to support my drug habit in that form. So we have seen an increase in that as well. And then with survival sex trafficking, again, it doesn't have to have a third party. That child could be brokering that sexual act to meet those basic needs. It could be for food, clothes, shelter, or it could be for a prom dress, right? And we see it so much to support their drug addictions. So understanding meaning. So commercial sexual exploitation of a child. I said, as of October 1 of 2016, child prostitution was stricken from our legal language and replaced with commercial sexual exploitation of a child, or CSEC. So if you hear that term, CSEC, it's the use of any person under the age of 18 for sexual purposes in exchange for money, goods, or services, or the promise of money, goods, and services. That promise piece is important because promise is solicitation, right? And it's illegal to solicit a child for sexual services or sexual images. So when you may be working with a youth and they tell you they've been solicited, whether it be online or in person, that's something that authorities need to know about so we can figure out. Because even if your kid says no, you should give them lots of props that they said no and praise. But that next kid may need a prom dress, right? So that next kid might say yes, $50 sounds good for an image, for a picture, or what have you, or for this sexual act. Yes, I'll do that. Again, commercial sex act, any sex act, anything of value is given to or received by. So it could be prostitution. So again, child prostitution is illegal. It's not in our legal language, but if the child is involved in exchangement of those sexual acts, even if there's no third party, it doesn't matter. They're a victim of sexual sex trafficking. Exotic dancing and stripping, that's very common. It's also a gateway. A lot of times the traffickers will get our victims and survivors involved in the clubs dancing or private events dancing, getting them used to taking off their clothes, putting their clothes back on. They will introduce them to pornography because they're trying to get the normalcy that everybody's doing this, everybody speaks this way, getting them used to the terminology, getting them used to how to sexually entice others. And those are things that they're witnessing. In the state of Florida, the only thing that's required to dance is an ID stating you are 18. Now, there are certain areas of Florida in cities that their city ordinance that says they have to be 21. But as far as the state law goes, the state law says 18. However, kids can get fake IDs fairly easily. Those IDs are scannable. So it's fairly easy for them to get into the clubs. And even if they're not in the clubs, they're dancing in private events. And there's really no regulation on that at all. So we began investigating these cases in 2009. We had 43 reports. In 2022, we had 1,876 reports. A lot of people ask, is this because it's happening so much more frequently? And I believe with the rise of the internet and apps and social media and gaming, online gaming, yes, it has increased, but a lot of it's because of our advocacy, right? We really have strong state laws requiring mandated reporters to have training, whether you're in the healthcare field, the social service field, law enforcement, hospitality, educators, they all have to have training. So of course, the more people are trained, the more people know the signs to look for, the more reports that we get, right? So that's also a reason for the increase. So what are some of the risk factors of people being recruited? Just are they under the age of 18? That in itself puts them in a higher risk factor. Substance abuse, sometimes feeling insecure. We all do, even now, today. But think back when you were 12, 13 years old. You probably had different, maybe insecurities than you do now. Own or have access to social media or gaming systems. Desire to develop that romantic relationship with others. Are attracted to consumer goods. Feel misunderstood. Fight with your parents. Sometimes feel the parents don't understand you. Want more independence and test boundaries and take risks. I pretty much probably just described you when you were, 14, 15 years old. This is very common. All these risk factors are very common in every kid, whether, it was ourselves back in the day or kids today, right? That stayed pretty constant, right? We're all doing these same things, or, whether experimental, or maybe we wasn't using substances, but we did feel insecure or still desired that romantic relationship, still was testing the boundaries of our parents. So what does human trafficking look like? I think this video does a really good job on when you really look at it in the lens of all the different people that could have came in this kid's life and identified that something wasn't quite right. Maybe they didn't know exactly that it was trafficking, but it just didn't look right. So think about the places that you go or the places that you frequent, whether it be Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, or going shopping or going out to eat, or taking Ubers and Lyfts or buses, or on the airplanes and different things of that. Where could you kind of open your eyes and expand it? Because I always tell people, usually once you know what to look like, you will see it. So really thinking about all the different places that maybe someone could have intervened.
Hey, where you headed? You ladies from around here?
Actually, I'm from Florida.
Florida?
Are we paying you to talk or to drive?
My bad.
Go get her.
Not her.
She's going to make us some money.
Are you hungry? My man takes great care of us.
I said, where you been, not what do I think? Answer the question.
So running away is also a huge risk factor. We know that the national average says that most likely within a 72-hour time period of a child running away, they're going to be recruited in trafficking. We know in Florida that number are within hours, within minutes sometimes, depending on where they are, whether they're in a rural area or a more urban area. And it really doesn't matter. A lot of people ask about the rural areas. Like if you have a truck stop, if you have gas stations, these are common places where kids will run to and ask or exchange something for a ride out of town. In our urban areas, a lot of times the traffickers are there and waiting at the corner stores. They're there and waiting at the local parks, at the bus stations, where kids congregate, where kids hang out. These kids, they are there and waiting. Because oftentimes when kids run, they run with very little and they run without a plan. There's something that happened. Maybe it's a trauma response. Maybe, something just agitated them or irritated them. Maybe they lack those coping skills. So, when something bad happens, they run. And again, they don't run with a plan. They usually either have just the clothes on their back, or maybe they pack, a small bag like the young lady did in the video. You can see in the video, there was some family drama there, some dysfunction, and she ran, right? And she ran from very little. She was on a bus bench. That's very, very common. And she's approached. Now, she was approached by another female. Could it possibly be a female trafficker? It could be. On this particular incident, it appeared that it was probably someone that was working with the trafficker, right? Sometimes they're referred to as bottoms. It's someone that trafficker trusts that to recruit others. And sometimes they use that technique because if they're approached by a female, they seem less threatening, right? They're like, hang with me. I got your back. I'm your sister or a mama figure, a mother figure. And they get them involved that way. She made the comment, stay with me. My man takes really good care of us. She's hungry. She doesn't know where she's going to go. There's money given. And, but usually, whether it's substances that are given, money that's given, food that's given, a couch to sleep on is given, usually it's going to, there's going to be something in return. I gave you these things. What are you going to do for me? And that's where the trafficking comes in. So again, oftentimes they're recruiting through those substances. So they're going to target an individual that already has an existing substance abuse to recruit them in trafficking. Now, maybe they're coming to them for marijuana or coming to them for, some pills or Molly or what have you. And then they get them addicted to more dangerous drugs, more addictive drugs. So they keep coming back. That's very common. They may control them through the substances. So after they get them addicted, they know they're going to have that framework of reward and punishment, and they're going to keep coming back. And it's going to decrease the victim's ability to resist trafficking and abuse. Substance abuse has coping mechanisms. Some victims of human trafficking may abuse substances as a response to their trauma and their victimization, whether that's past or present trauma. That forced criminality piece, we didn't see this so much. Fortunately, in the state of Florida, we have expungement laws. So if we can prove that the criminality took place, whether it's an adult and maybe the adult was arrested for prostitution, or that adult maybe was arrested for substance possession or drug trafficking charges, if we can prove that it happened during the trafficking occurrence, those charges can either be dropped or they can be expunged depending on where they are in the judicial system. And that's also with children. If children cannot be arrested for prostitution in the state of Florida, but they may be arrested for other naming offenses. And it's very common for them to be arrested, for minors to be arrested for substance possession or for drug paraphernalia or for robberies and burglaries and things like that. And again, if we can prove that it occurred during the trafficking occurrence, those can be either expunged or dropped as well. So drug sale or theft is very common. Recruiting for their own traffickers are very common. A lot of people, when you hear, oh, well, they're recruiting, they're traffickers, they're not a victim. Oftentimes it is a trauma response because the person that's recruiting oftentimes does not see their way out of the trafficking situation. The only thing that they can do to be able to stop having to do these sexual acts over and over again is to recruit others to do that for their trafficker. So when we hear that quite often, oh, well, they're a recruiter, we're like, wait, time out. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's see, are they a victim or are they a trafficker? Because we do have females that are traffickers that has never been involved at all in sex trafficking or labor trafficking. But more than likely, we see that oftentimes recruiters have been involved, and that's their way, or their way that they feel like they can get out of the trafficking situation is to recruit. Coercion, that power and control by the traffickers, avoiding risk of commercial sex and threats of violence, including gang control, is all used through forced criminality. Let's talk about some of the global vulnerabilities that traffickers often target. We keep talking about addiction because it is so strong. Disabilities and mental health is another one. People with disabilities, they may have to rely on others for their day-to-day, being able to help clean themselves or be able to help pick themselves up or what have you. Oftentimes people with disabilities, whether it's a hearing disability or intellectual disabilities, oftentimes they feel isolated. They feel they're constantly craving that bond with another individual. They're craving that friendship. They are craving for someone to listen to them, to be their friend. And this is a vulnerability that they often prey upon. Mental health, sometimes they distinguish, facts from reality. Sometimes they get very confused and can easily manipulate them. They oftentimes, traffickers over a period of time will start playing mind tricks with victims and really question the victims, maybe start questioning their own mental health, or maybe it is all me, maybe it's not them, very victim blaming, victim shaming behaviors. Gangs, we know that gangs are heavily involved in trafficking, and they use to exploit men, women, and children as well. Other vulnerable populations: refugee and unaccompanied minors, homeless children, youth, and families, children and youth in care and foster care in the dependency system, people from urban areas, people from rural areas. Our LGBTQ plus communities are definitely targeted as well. Youth, anyone under the age of 18, regardless of how they identify. Mental health or substance abuse, every race, every socioeconomic class. Vulnerable youth, that are emotionally, they might be scared, lonely, desperate to belong, or need for love. That physical and cognitive disabilities. Limited support, they're on the run, maybe they're disconnected. The kids that are on the run are definitely targeted. They're targeted, also for substances. Again, kids that are on the run are at a higher risk factor of getting addicted to substances as well. Mental health diagnoses is another one. Low self-esteem, again, looking for that sense of belonging. History of physical abuse, history of sexual abuse, mental health history, runaway episodes, troubled, dysfunctional families, attention-seeking behaviors, drug abuse, seeking a romantic or friendship connection. Again, when we're doing this work, and when I used to do investigations myself, I would always ask, a victim, a survivor, what drew you to this person? And the number one thing that they would say almost across the board is they listened to me. And I tell people whenever I do these trainings, and especially when I train any high stress population groups, career paths, whether it's social services or healthcare, law enforcement, we talk about these high stress careers. And a lot of times when we get home, we are tired. We have been dealing with people's trauma all day long, right? And, when we get home, home is our sanctuary. We walk in and we just want to breathe. We just want to take a break, take the load off. We're emotionally drained, right? And then a lot of times we have kids, and those kids are immediately coming up to us and saying, Mom, Dad, brother took something out of my room, or sister won't let me watch this on TV, or they won't let me play the game, or what have you. And a lot of times we're like, really, dudes? Like, you didn't even give me 2 seconds through the door. You guys just need to deal with it. Do you know what I've been dealing with all day? And that's not necessarily a good thing. And I'm very guilty of that. That's a bomb fell on me. That sometimes I shut them down. But that's not a good thing, because if you're shutting them down for those little things, when something big arises, they're probably not going to come to you. They're going to go to that person on the other end of that social media app, on the other end of that gaming system, online gaming, or to someone that they met at the park or met at the mall or what have you, someone that will listen to them. And that's why traffickers are master manipulators. They're going to fill that void. Whatever that kid needs is who they're going to be. If they need that mother figure, that's who they're going to be, or that's who they're going to put in their life. If they need that father figure, that's who they're going to be. If they need or seeking that romantic relationship, that's who they're going to be. If they need a supplier of substances, that's who they're going to be. It's, fill in whatever that void is. So think of a person as a broken person, like a broken sidewalk, right? And they're just there to fill that gap, fill that crack, or whatever that kid needs at that point in time. And it's not just kids, right? It's the same thing for adults. They're looking for that vulnerability. We all have them, regardless of our age. Well, I would ask the same question when I would interview traffickers. I would interview abusers, and I would ask that same question: what drew you to this person? What drew you to this kid? And many times they would tell me, put me in a room of 100 people and I can pick out the most vulnerable. And honestly, they can't. They're very, very good. If they would use that skill for good, they probably make the best FBI profilers, right? But they don't. They use it for criminality. They use it to abuse people. in a negative and extremely traumatic way. So understanding the commonalities, the lure, the trust, and the payback. And I know some of this is probably just a review for a lot of you, but when we're doing these trainings, we just really don't know how many folks has had HT 101, so to speak, or what have you. So I'm giving you kind of an overview, and then we're going to get it, dive in a little bit more deeper on the substance abuse issue. But we start with the lure, and it doesn't matter whether they're meeting people online or whether they're meeting people in person. It's the same technique. Again, a lot of times we do these trainings, I told you, people think about the movie Taken, right? And they believe that abuse starts immediately. And normally that is not the case. Normally it starts with developing that bond, right? Developing that trust to that person. So it's going to start with the lure. They're going to pay special attention. Again, give lots of compliments. It could be in person or it could be online. They're going to give a lot of affection, a lot of support. Maybe they are, cash apping them money to get their hair done, their nails done, taking them to the barber shop, maybe taking them on shopping sprees, paying for perfume and cologne, maybe taking them to parties, again, introducing them to drugs. Maybe they're promised if they do these things or they, allow them to do these things, it's going to increase their popularity. Maybe, getting their nails done, getting their hair done, having items that they normally couldn't afford. It is going to increase their popularity because the people at school or in their circles is going to say, hey, how did you get those nice things? And they're going to say, hey, come hang with me and my boy Jimmy and he'll hook you up. Right. And that's just an example. Then it goes into the trust. They sell the glamour of the street life. They introduce and provide alcohol and drugs. Maybe if they've never had any alcohol or never experimented with drugs before, they're going to introduce them. Maybe if they're already using alcohol and drugs, they're providing it for them. Again, in the beginning, maybe they're even providing it for free, right? But nothing's usually free. And I always tell people when I do these trainings, and if you've said it on any of my trainings, I've said this over and over again. You guys probably have great friends. They're going to tell you their friends is paying for them, these things. They're going to say, my friend bought me my new clothes. My friend paid for my movie ticket. My friends paid for me to go to the park. My friends paid for my tattoo. My friends are paying for my hair, my nails, and my food, and for me to stay there. You guys have great friends. Your friends are probably not paying for you to get your hair done every 6 weeks and your nails done every couple of weeks and these shopping sprees and, $60 bottle of perfume and cologne and, $50 purchase of makeup purchases and things like that, $300, $500 tattoo. They're not doing it out of the kindness of their heart. There's going to most likely be exchangement for something. Now, maybe it's not sex trafficking, right? Maybe they're selling drugs. Maybe they are burglarizing, robbing people. There can be other criminality functions, but you need to dig deep. Do not ever accept the answer, my friend paid for it. Now, if that friend maybe works and makes money and maybe they are giving it away or trying to buy their affection or something like that, possibly. But you need to be digging, because they could be selling their own pictures. If your kids have TikTok and Snapchat and social media apps, and gaming systems, they know they can sell those pictures and they know they can make a lot of money. It is not uncommon for us to be staffing these cases where these kids are making, $1,000 to $4,000 a month selling these pictures online of themselves. So they know they can make lots of money. You need to dig deep and find out exactly what's happening. In the trust stage, they're selling the youth on the glamour of the street life. They're always having lots of money. They have all these nice things. They're introducing them to pornography. They are maybe introducing them to clubs. They say, I love you. They may start having sex with that child. They're challenging the boundaries set by the parents or caregivers. So you may have a positive parent. That parent is saying you can't do these things. You have curfew. You got to be home by 11, whatever. And they're that trafficker saying, your parents don't understand you. They're treating you like a little boy or a little girl. You're a grown man, you're a grown woman. Listen to me. I got your back. They're going to start promising them the world, whatever. Again, if they need that parent figure, that's who they're going to be. If they want that boyfriend, girlfriend figure, that's who they're going to be. They're going to tell them and promise they're going to give them that family they've always wanted. They're going to marry them. They're going to, you know, start developing that trauma bond. And then the payback stage, they force the child to pay back all these things. You know, I bought you all these things. What are you going to do for me? You're going to dance. You're going to do sexual services. We're going to sell images of yourself and your body. They may sexually exploit them. They're putting them in a position of vulnerability. There's that differential of power because most likely they're older. There's that trust and they feel like, you know, they develop this bond with this person. They love this person. And then they start using them for labor and commercial sex work. So this is a video. This is a pretty lengthy one, but I think it's very powerful. So we're going to watch that. I'm just going to set my timer because I don't want to run out of time here. And again, at any point in time you have a question, feel free to put it in chat. And we also are going to have a Q&A section at the end. So I can answer any questions as well.
I think when I was first, you know, on the streets, I still kind of separated myself from everybody else that was down there and looked at myself as like unique, that like, you know, I'm not as bad off of as these people. I'm not as dirty as these people. I haven't, you know, done certain things yet. I haven't been arrested yet. Like I'll be fine.
Kensington Avenue runs under an elevated train, they call it the L. So it's kind of like a hallway almost, where it's the stores and then there's the train platform. So there's no sunlight, there's nothing like that. It's inner city. There's trash, there's everything you could think of. It's abandoned buildings, abandoned factories, abandoned houses. And then there's the heroin, and there's on every street corner down there, there's dealers. You can't go anywhere without running into dealers.
That went from trying it, you know, probably to within a month, like needing to do it every single day. So when I moved down there, like it was very bad. It wasn't about like the thrill of getting high. It was like, I need this, or like I feel like I'm going to die because I'm getting that sick. That's one of the tools that the pimps use to keep these girls under control and keep them in the working status, because they need the drugs, they need the money to get the drugs. So that's a big key factor in their control over these girls. In the beginning, it's easy for them to manipulate you when you have nothing and they're literally providing you with everything. And they have that control over you. It kind of became just like giving in to them because I felt obligated, you know, to do certain things with them in order for them to keep providing for me. If they would be physically abusive towards you, you know, then they would remind you that they were like your primary source of income, your primary, you know, place to have a roof over your head to feed you. So even though that part of it was there, it's kind of like you were willing to sacrifice. I was willing to sacrifice enduring that, because without that person, like I thought I had nothing.
We ran into her and she didn't fit. She didn't belong. She was clean. That's a big thing. And she was dressed nice. And that didn't fit. And then after we talked to her, she was educated. It all didn't jive. He probably first met me when I had just gotten out there, and I wasn't, you know, as bad off or as beaten up as I was, you know, years later, when he found me again. Then the second time, it's like, all right, you're back down here, what's going on? And the progression started where she just kept getting worse and worse and worse and deeper into Kensington, where she couldn't get out. It's honestly like a war zone is how I would describe Kensington. I normalized it so much, but most of what goes on there is, you know, drugs, prostitution, and violence. It's crazy when I think about it now, because it's no way for a person to live. Finally, at some point, her mom actually reached out to me and wanted me to, you know, see if I could find her. They wanted to get her help and get her off the street and out of what she was doing and where she was.
I had alienated myself from them for so long, lied to them, stole from them, had them searching for me for months, putting out missing persons reports for me. There had been warrants out for my arrest because I had failed to appear in court for months, like I was running from the police. And Detective Johnson was on the warrant unit at that time. I remember I was walking down a one-way street this way and I see a truck go this way. And for a split second, I thought about running. He got out of the car and he handcuffed me. And he literally called my mom on the phone to say, like, we found your daughter. So that day that he arrested me, it's kind of like I had that moment of clarity where I realized that I was going to be in trouble because I was going to be in jail. But I also had that sense of relief that was a little scary because I knew that it was over. I knew that the way that I was living and, you know, my days on the streets and years of living that way was ending. So as scared as I was, it was almost relieving in a sense to know, like, even if this is forced, like, my life doesn't have to be like this anymore. Looking back, like, that day, he saved my life in the sense that had he not gotten me then, like, I don't think that I would have made it off of the streets alive had I continued to stay out there.
I don't look at it like that, like I saved her life. I mean, now sitting back after she said it, yeah, but that's what I was supposed to do. That was my job. That's what the task force, everybody was here to do. That's what we're supposed to do, is help these girls get off the street.
Whether it's, you know, addiction or prostitution or human trafficking, it doesn't discriminate against any, you know, socioeconomic status or any background. Even me in the beginning thought, like, you know, I come from a good family, an educated family, a good area, like, this could never happen to me. Like, I was one of those naive, ignorant people that didn't think it could happen to me, as though I was above other people. But it can happen to anybody. You don't have to come from, you know, a bad home or live in the inner city where that stuff might be misconceived as being more prevalent. Like, it happens everywhere. It can happen to anybody.
I think that's very important to understand. It can happen to anyone. A lot of times when people think about these cases, when they think about human trafficking, they think, oh, that doesn't happen, you know, in my area. Trafficking is not in rural areas because they're thinking about, like, Pretty Woman, right? They're thinking about fishnets and stilettos. Well, most likely you're not going to see that walking down the country roads, right? But so much has changed. A majority of the cases that we see is that online exploitation. They are advertising online. They are engaging in the transactions are online. The payment is online. There's many cases that we investigate. They've never met their trafficker. You know, it looks very different than it did back in 2008, 2009, or, you know, in the 2000s, for sure. So really understanding it can absolutely be anyone. It could be someone from a dysfunctional family. It could be someone with a, you know, high status in the community. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic class. It could be absolutely anyone. And again, with the opioid issue that we have, you know, we see that so much. We see, you know, people get in a car accident and get addicted to substances, get addicted to painkillers, and then go on this, you know, negative impact their entire careers. You know, we've had nurses that became addicted, doctors that became addicted, firefighters, police officers, and they lost their career because of their substance misuse. So it happens all across the board. There's definitely impacts on the human trafficking victim, whether that's a psychological impact, a social impact, a physical impact, spiritual or emotional. Showing those signs of abuse, you know, a lot of times when traffickers are abusive, they don't oftentimes are violent to the face or other areas that might be exposed. A lot of times the abuse is still occurring. It's very violent, but normally they're going to be hitting on their stomach area, their back, their bottoms, their legs, because that area doesn't swell and the skin doesn't break as easily, and it can be covered with tattoo makeup. You might have behavioral signs. Maybe they often express interest with relationships with older adults or older people. So if you have a 12-year-old and all their friends are, 16, 17, 18, 19 and above, huge sign for you. Because, what do they have in common with that young person? Addiction. Signs of addiction is very important. We're about to go over some of those signs of addiction that you may see. Emotional signs, being fearful, have anxiety, depression, submission, tension, nervousness, hypervigilancy, or paranoid behavior. So signs of drug use and alcohol addiction. They might be receiving lower grades. They're not performing as normal in school. They're missing school. They're skipping class. They're no longer participating in sports or extracurricular activities. They're no longer engaging in any type of activities or hobbies. They're getting into trouble at school. They're getting in trouble with authorities or the law, spending time with different friend groups, spending more time alone or becoming more withdrawn, spending more time out and away from their home, having different eating habits, having different sleeping habits, weight loss, loss of interest in things they once loved, bloodshot eyes, uncontrollable movement or being very fidgety or having tremors, skin picking, missing curfew, mood swings, loss of impulse control, nosebleeds, poor hygiene, prescription drugs or alcohol is going missing from the home or from family members' homes, experiencing problems with family members or other loved ones or with their friends, and taking less time with their appearance or not caring about their appearance. So what are some common substances used by teens? Marijuana is probably still number one. Stimulants such as Adderall is also very common. MDMA, also known ecstasy or Molly, painkillers and prescription drugs, spice or K2 or other synthetic marijuana. And a lot of the kids, when we staff these cases, they say they prefer the synthetic marijuana over regular THC marijuana. They like the effects of it. They like the way it makes them feel. Heroin, cocaine, crystal meth, LSD, acid, shrooms, DXM, which is in cough syrup, inhalants, such as things in glue and nail polish, nicotine vaping, alcohol, and ketamine. We have had many, many cases that involved exchangement either of pornography, pictures, sexual content, or sexual transactions and sexual acts of human trafficking because for vapes, for nicotine vapes, for exchangement of those vapes. That has probably been something over the last 2 years that we have seen a pretty drastic increase of them utilizing and selling their bodies or selling images or selling sexual acts to be able to attain those vapes. Ketamine is another very popular substance that's used by kids. So let's kind of break down some of these party drugs. Adderall is a stimulant, and oftentimes it's being used for them to stay awake longer. Many of you maybe, remember back when you were in school, in college, a lot of people would use Adderall, especially right before a big test or a final to be able to stay up and study. But oftentimes it's used in conjunction also with other drugs just to stay awake, to be able to stay partying and staying up. Cocaine is often used again as party with teens and adults. It can increase your blood pressure and your heart rate, dilate your pupils, cause insomnia, loss of appetite, elevated heart rate, raises your body temperature. It could cause nausea, pain, tremors, panic, anxiety, and paranoia. So some of them, may hear cocoa, coke, crack, crank, rock, snow. It's just some examples. And Adderall, a lot of times it's beanies, black beauties, crank, ice, speed, or uppers. MMDA, very popular, especially in rave with different music festivals. It's very common for people to utilize and use MMDA, whether it's a young adult, whether it's a child, a youth. They often call it Molly or ecstasy. They also utilize it to stay up. It makes them stay up for long periods of time. This is often used also in trafficking for that reason. Not only does it increase sexual feelings and desires with the feeling of wanting to be touched or wanting to feel close to someone else, It also increases their ability to stay up and be able to stay up longer. So a lot of times the traffickers will provide it to their victim and survivors to keep them up for longer periods of time so they can keep working. So sometimes they're called atoms or beans, clarity, disco biscuits, ecstasy, Molly, lover speed, peace. These are all common, and there's a few others there as well. Ketamine is also often used and known as a party drug. It has a lot of dissociative properties. It can lead to distortion of sight, color, sound, and self-awareness. It can be snorted, it can be injected, it can be mixed into drinks, it can be smoked with marijuana or tobacco. A lot of times, I see it, a lot of times the kids will refer to it as special K, super K, or vitamin K is probably the most common ones that we have seen here locally. Mushrooms is another. It's unlike stimulant. It has psychoactive drugs. It can come in any form. A lot of times people use it and make it into teas or oils. They'll vape it. Sometimes they'll make it into candies. A lot of times they'll call them shrooms, magic mushrooms, boomers, zoomers are very common as well. So understanding the dangers of fentanyl, and this is what is so scary for me. We've had many kids that have overdosed on fentanyl, had to be brought back with multiple doses of Narcan. It seems like it's happening more and more over the last few years. You know, Narcan now is pretty well readily available. People in the past, you know, it started off only the healthcare had it or the paramedics, and then law enforcement started carrying it. And now many professionals have to carry it, right, and have access to it because it's so prevalent now. The fentanyl can be in absolutely anything. Pretty much any of the drugs that I've already described, it can be put in. It can be cut. It's very addictive. It's tasteless. It's odorless. So they can't smell it. They can't taste it. It's too small to see it. So they have absolutely no idea that it's in there until they've already ingested it. You can see at the bottom of the screen how small of a dose is a lethal dose for most Americans. As little as 2 grains of salt. Think about it. 2 grains of salt can overdose someone. That's unfathomable. Substances such as marijuana, Molly, opiates, heroin, methamphetamines are often laced with it or cut with other drugs, right? That's what I was saying before. You know, oftentimes these kids, they think they're using one drug and they don't know that it's got 3 other drugs within it. And they don't understand why, you know, it's keeping them up for days at a time or why it made them feel a particular way. These dealers purposely cut the substances with fentanyl to increase the user's addiction. So they keep coming back for more and more and more. It can be anywhere. It could, again, be in a pill, a powder, and it's totally random. So where one dose may be fatal, the other may not be depending on the batch. So it's no way to really control it. And that's also what's so scary. So this is a case review of a prior victim. Again, of course, I've changed the initials and no names is provided. But this is a youth. Her drug of choice was heroin. She used other drugs, acid, alcohol, methamphetamines, marijuana, mollies, and opioids. She was placed in a residential substance abuse treatment program. She was in the program for 6 months and she successfully completed the program. She did show progress and she did go into a step down from an intensive outpatient level of care. Then she returned home. Pretty much as soon as she returned home, she began using marijuana again. And then shortly thereafter, she started using more dangerous drugs. She overdosed at least 3 separate times, and it required administration of Narcan and emergency life-saving measures on multiple occurrences. During that trafficking episode, she traded sexual acts to obtain money and payment for drugs in exchange for sexual acts for substances. She disclosed she was lured into trafficking to sustain her drug addiction. She stated that she used substances to self-medicate to deal with her past trauma and really what was currently happening, because she did not want to have to exchange sexual acts for the substances. She saw no other way, but to be able to deal with it, she would self-medicate. She also used substances to escape reality while participating in the sexual acts with buyers. We're going to watch this video and then we're going to be wrapping it up so we can have plenty of time for some Q&A.
Give me an H, give me an E, give me an R-O-I-N. What's that smell? Heroin!
Started at a party, everyone was there. She had a couple pills on a little dare, but now she's missing class and she's dropping her pom-poms. Nobody knows where she is, not even her mom. Everybody thought she was the all-American girl. So there goes the books, it's all about the score. There goes the doggy, life is such a bore. There goes the family, she's got a new friend. There goes the looks, this is the end. I guess she really was the all-American girl.
Pick up heroin and you'll throw away everything you love. Share your stories on Instagram with #heroin.
Unfortunately, that's how things, sometimes it's very easy to become addicted. I mean, some people say from their very first experimentation, they became addicted. It could happen to anybody. Again, a lot of times when they become severely addicted, they cannot think of anything else. They all can think about is their next fix. And that's why stability is so important. A lot of times when we're staffing these cases, I stress when they have severe substance abuse, they have to be detoxed appropriately. They need residential substance abuse treatment to be able to stabilize them so they can start focusing on counseling services and CSEC services. But without that stabilization piece, it's very difficult to start working with them. A lot of times it's just we're setting them up for failure. So stabilization for substance abuse, stabilization for mental health is key. And to being able to get them detoxed, get them sober so they can start getting the proper diagnosis and getting them on the right path. The bottom line is you can't be in denial. So you have to take a proactive approach. From the very first sign that you feel like you're working with someone or you know of someone that has a substance abuse problem, you need to take action. You need to be having conversations. You need to be, if you're working with a youth, you need to be staffing these cases, working it with your supervisors and bringing in professionals. You know, don't work these cases alone. It takes a collaborative effort on human trafficking cases, and you really need that think tank. That's why we do our multidisciplinary team staffings, is because, you want a team of professionals that, a roundtable approach to be able to staff these cases and figure out what's the best solution. So it's not just on your shoulders. So staffing these cases with your supervisors and professionals is so important. Establish a plan of action, clearly documenting your signs and concerns. What's making you think that they might be using substances? What are you seeing? What are the signs? You may not actually see them do it. You may not have a drug screen that is proving that they're using substances. What can you do? What can you, how can you document those concerns to kind of, build that case that you feel this is the direction and what is happening? Completing needed substance abuse evaluation and referrals. If they're on probation and they have a probation officer, you need to be contacting their JPO. The bottom line is if you wait, it could be too late. So don't ever be afraid to take action. You may be proven wrong. Maybe it's something completely different, but you do whatever you have to do to hopefully save that person's life. Because unfortunately, we've had a lot of cases and hear case after case, whether when we sit on our task forces and in the communities of people saying that this has happened to someone they love, and sometimes the outcome, wasn't a good outcome. So we need to make sure that we open our eyes, we look for it, we see the signs, and we take action. So if you have concerns for human trafficking and it's a minor, whether it is sex trafficking or labor trafficking, and it's a minor in the state of Florida, you're going to call the Florida Abuse Hotline or make an online report at myflfamilies.com. If it's an adult and you just really don't know what actually is going on, that you just want to leave information, leave a tip, you can contact the National Human Trafficking Tip Line. Of course, if any person, whether they're a minor or they're an adult, is at imminent risk of danger, you need to contact 911. I have a QR code here that goes directly also to the National Human Trafficking Tip Line. Again, my name is Marina Anderson, and I'm with DCF. Email is the best way to reach me, and my email is provided here. And at this time, I'm going to open it up for questions. So I'm going to leave this up for just a second and then open it up for questions. Do we have any questions in chat?
Yeah, we have a few, Marina, and there were some earlier that I've saved for you. You just touched on this, but I'd like to ask you to go a little more in depth on if you suspect that a youth that you're working with is being sex trafficked. Should you talk to the youth or your supervisor, or really what is your next step? And I didn't even say thank you. That was an amazing presentation. So that's one of the questions. Just want to get to that.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get back to you. It's not letting me stop. There it is. Oh, there we go. I lost the share button. So it really depends as to answer your question. So if you are in social services, you're a case manager, you're in investigations here, we have the human trafficking screening tool. You work for the Department of Juvenile Justice, you're a JPO, a juvenile probation officer, you would have access to do a screening tool, a human trafficking screening tool. And we would screen that person to see if they're possibly involved in human trafficking. It also has questions on there about substance use as well. If you're not in those roles, having conversations, trying to ask pertinent questions, if anyone's ever made them do something that they didn't want to do, has anyone ever made them, force them to work or force them to do something that they didn't want to do in the workspace? Are all good questions. And there's some really good tools out there online as well, and quick questionnaires that they can also, just 5 questions or so. A lot of healthcare professionals utilize that too, just as a quick reference of things to look for and identifiers. The Blue Campaign does really good work also on providing cards to law enforcement on things to look for and identifiers on when trafficking could also be occurring. And I believe STAC also puts out a lot of material as well, right?
Yeah, I've been posting it throughout. I just put up our youth and caregiver toolkit. Know that was done with the help of youth and caregivers and professionals in the field in a very accessible way that you can grab online. And know that 2 people have been asking, how do I get the videos and how do I get the presentation? So like all of them, I just posted the link where we'll have the full presentation and Marina's PowerPoint up on the website at that link. It's on our website. It's at Educational Resources. Marina, do you want to send me also just the video links, and then I'll post them up so everybody who's asked about that will get that up there too. Rachel, I think, just put up that there's a place called Communicare that has Narcan training and free Narcan and shipping for you all to take advantage of that. That info is in the chat as well. There was some questions here about specific ones about issues, finding rehabilitation homes for CSEC, that there's Southwest Florida. How do people, first of all, why don't you just talk about if someone is identifying a youth who might be vulnerable, what do they do? First of all, they call the hotline, right?
Yes, calling that hotline is key. We get involved in all cases that involves human trafficking of youth. So as far as the placement goes, we would be the ones that would be getting that placement option for them. A lot of times, whether it's a safe home placement, a safe foster home placement, maybe it's an at-risk placement, maybe it's a substance abuse or mental health placement, we are going to really work hard with our teams to get them into the appropriate level that they need. We do know, I mean, and this is nationwide, it's just not Florida specific, we need more. We need more substance abuse programs. We need more substance abuse beds. I have been told there's been some new monies that's supposed to be coming out soon to hopefully increase that bed capacity. So I'm hoping that that's going to be happening in the near future, because we definitely need it. A lot of times we're trying to wrap them, and we do try to wrap them in their homes with services when we can, but there's so many kids and adults that need that higher level of care.
Great. Thank you. So that's your first thing. And it kind of goes to Rosalind's question here, statement. If they see someone on the street suspecting it might be someone who is being trafficked, what should you do? They might appear young, homeless, sleeping outside on benches, not sure if it's okay to approach if they need help. We don't want to scare them. They don't want to be in an unsafe situation themselves. That's one question. And then relate also from Rosalind, I'll just throw this one in. Are most victims from out of the country or other states? Are they local? What do you think?
So if you see someone, you don't have their information, you don't have their demographic information, the best thing for you to do is either call 911 if you feel like it's an emergency situation, or calling that non-emergency number, your local department, and saying this is a person that you're seeing. Maybe you're seeing them quite often. There's been times where, I've had to do the same thing, where I saw that, every time I ride by, I see someone or I see a family and it doesn't appear right. Something seems off, but I don't really have enough information to call in a report. So I don't have really a location to send them, or I don't have demographic information to file the report. But calling that non-emergency number, and they can get patrol out there and have conversations and find out more information. And then, of course, if there's concerns, they're going to call a report into the hotline.
And the other thing I always say too is, if you do suspect there's some indication of human trafficking, and even when you said before, like when you see some signs, we work with people all the time. We don't know 100% it's always trafficking. There are just going to be red flags or signals. Go ahead and say you suspect it, right? I mean, it is something that is going to push a couple of different buttons maybe, or at least get others thinking that they can be looking for this, where you might have seen a red flag that someone else will miss. And
that's so true. I mean, oftentimes victims are not going to self-identify for many reasons, because of the trauma bond that's there, because of the threat that's there. So oftentimes you're not going to get someone saying, help me, save me. That's not what you're going to get. You're going to get sorry, that was my timer. They're going to get the signs, right? You're going to see the signs. You're going to see indicators. You're going to see multiple indicators, right? Or a lot of circumstantial evidence, so to speak, right? Or surrounding circumstances. If you come from social work world, that's our term. So really looking at all those pieces and putting that puzzle together is very important.
Great. And I'm putting up there the Narcan resource I think was called Communicare. So I don't have a link, but that's where something like that. So if Rachel is still on and you have that link, you can put it in the chat. Would you say that the lore, and this came up a few times, just has to do with kids and, youth being naive, just naivete, where, we all were there, like you were saying, of course we're naive. They were children, right? Or they were youth and trusting.
Right. All across the board there, right? We're naive. Kids think this isn't going to happen to me. That, that happens to other people. Oh, I trust my source. We hear that a lot. Oh, you don't have to worry about, I might be using drugs, but don't worry, I know where it's coming from. But really they don't, right? And even if that person that sells that drug to them, that substance for them, they're probably not the one that's actually making the drug, right? So they don't really even know what they're selling. And we see that so much, again, with it being cut. Going back to the question on, is it more foreign born opposed to U.S. citizens? We have both. We have both foreign born and U.S. citizens. The majority of our cases are U.S. citizens. Majority of the cases are Floridians, right? They're coming from Florida when we're talking about Florida stats. But, we do have people that travel. We do know that oftentimes traffickers will take them to multiple states or multiple areas, depending on what's going on, especially when it's events and things of that nature. And it could be any event. Everybody says, oh, Super Bowl. Well, Super Bowl is just one of many, right? It could be anything from political events to faith-based events to anything that's going to bring a large crowd. You know, there's going to be movement. But there's also movement every day when there's not an event, right? So it doesn't have to have that component. It doesn't mean that there's no trafficking when there's not racing in Daytona, right? There's trafficking there every single day. But we do see that increase a little bit when there's maybe a race or, you know, whether it's a sporting event or whether it's spring break or, you know, some other type of activity. But again, trafficking occurs every single day in every single area. It doesn't matter if it's a rural or an urban area, it's everywhere.
Exactly. And you know what, a couple of people brought up and asked about this is also this also happens with labor trafficking. And just the fact that people can be both labor trafficked and sex trafficked at the same time is important to remember, right? And that substance misuse intersects also with people who are labor trafficked.
Mm-hmm. And somebody said something about the traffickers can be anyone. It can be your highest level CEOs, billionaires, to your lowest level drug dealers. It could be all across the gamut. It could be a parent. It could be, you know, someone that they know, is someone that they don't know. They could not, maybe they've never met them. Maybe they're in another country. And this is something we're seeing so much more, is that the traffickers, they're not meeting them. The traffickers, maybe they live here. Maybe the victims here in Florida. And we just had one yesterday. The traffickers in Germany. Because it's a world wide web. They're everywhere. And as long as they have access to that internet, they can be anywhere. The victims can be anywhere and the perpetrators can be anywhere, right? So it definitely looks a lot different than it did, you know, 10 years ago.
Exactly. Thank you. And we're getting a lot of people thanking you. Great training, all that. So thanks for that. We've got just 1 minute left and a couple of other questions. Services related to human trafficking for teens are voluntary. Can we identify human trafficking and substance abuse, but then what? Are there other things, I guess they're getting to? What about non-voluntary trainings? I mean, non-voluntary programs.
Okay. So this is, you know, a hot topic, right? So a majority of our programming, whether it's the CSEC programming, safe home programming for adults and for kids, right, is voluntary. There's no lockdown facility. We hear this all the time. We need to put them in a locked facility. There's no locked facilities in Florida for human trafficking. There's no locked facilities for substance abuse either. It has to be in a voluntary. The only way they could be court ordered through DJJ, so say through their probation. And the same thing with adults. They could be court ordered into a substance abuse program, but you can't be, it's not locked, right? Some of the facilities are a little bit harder to escape from or run from because of their location or some security measures that are in place, but they're truly not locked facilities. They have to voluntarily go. So sometimes that can be difficult, right? Sometimes, again, that bond with human trafficking is very strong. They don't want to leave their communities. They don't identify as a victim. They're just not ready. They're not there yet. And, you know, even though the things that are happening is very dangerous, but the law is very clear that we cannot force anyone to go into any type of treatment, whether it's substance abuse or CSEC. But having those relationships and really working with them, and that's what we really strive hard in Florida, is engaging them in services, engaging them in survivor mentorship or lived experience mentorship, getting them to be able to have those conversations and develop those relationships with providers, and hoping getting them they are ready to go to treatment. They are ready to get sober. They are ready to accept more services is key. And it has worked. We are seeing success with developing those relationships. Not to say it's not hard work. It's very hard work, but the work does pay off.
Absolutely. Well, we're a minute over. So unfortunately I've got to cut it off here. Marina, thank you again. This has really been a fantastic, informative, compelling training, and we appreciate it. Everybody, I have put the link so that you can watch this next week, and as well as we'll get those videos and the PowerPoint up for you so you can share it know that if you do have colleagues or friends that watch this or want to watch it and get the certificate, you will be in touch with me. And I just put my email, robin@surviveandthrive advocacy.org in the chat, so you can contact us and we'll get you a certificate of attendance. Remember USF, and if there are a bunch of you watching together, center support at usf.edu is your contact. And I can put it's Robin, ROBIN at Survive and Thrive. I can't talk and type. I'll put it up at surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. So please be in touch. I put Marina's in there as well. Next month on the 19th, we will be doing the Stack Pro When Human Trafficking Comes to Work training. That'll be myself and Graciela Marquina, our community services advocate, where you will also get a certificate and be certified. After you attend that, know that we've got 2 hours of CLE as well as DBPR certification for that. So I think that's it. Everybody, thank you. Thanks for hanging in. Have a wonderful, restful weekend. I hope it's great. And
So
we'll
if you're
see.
watching this in person, because there's just a few people asking, if you're watching it in person, then you're going to get a certificate. But if you have a coworker that was to go back and review it, then you would need to email Robin to be able to obtain that certificate.
There you go. And I just put it in again, robin@surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. Just go on our website. You'll see how to get in touch with us. No problem. All right, everyone. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, USF, Cassandra and Lisa. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.